Wonderful. All right, my first tip for writing well in English and being a solid writer is to write like a real person. This is the rule that I tell all of my students, and I've been telling my students ever since I graduated. It's very easy, particularly in school, to slip into the habit of using really complex and winding and academic language. You have the tendency to want to sound smart, to want to sound as if you know what you're talking about and as if you have a really solid grasp on all of the concepts. And so you result in going to default rather towards academic language. However, if this is done incorrectly, if you lean too much into that kind of language, it's likely that you'll create the opposite effect, which is sounding like a fool. So, the number one rule is to focus on clearly conveying your point, structuring your arguments well, and making sure that your writing flows naturally. The golden rule of writing in English is clarity over complexity. You can write the most beautiful paragraph with long, winding sentences and beautiful prose and really long, kind of complex, flowery vocabulary. But if whoever is marking your work can't actually figure out what your argument is or what sort of message you're trying to share in your story, then you're not going to get a good mark. And at the end of the day, you need to be clearing those arguments first. You need to be ensuring that they are the clearest part of your writing. And that little exemplar there, the kind of writing we're trying to avoid is, in writing his 1945 novella Animal Farm, George Orwell effervescently constructed an allegorical fable which shrewdly celebrates the Soviet Union's ascension to power. Cool. I mean, it sounds nice coming off the tongue, but what does it actually mean? There's really no way of knowing. Instead, we condense it, we make it simple, we make it straightforward, we make it to the point. George Orwell's 1945 novella Animal Farm is an effective fable which allegorically reflects on the rise of the Soviet Union. Much nicer, much crisper, and much easier to understand. All right, second tip is to read before you write. When you're given a task sheet at the start of the term, and hopefully also a marking guide by your teacher, it is really important that you read through it in its entirety before you jump into the task, even if you've done a task similar to it before. Go through, highlight, and mark all of the most important points on the sheet, and it's essential that you know exactly what it is that the task is and what your marker is looking for. What are the words that are repeated? So I find that in a lot of English marking guides, you'll see the word discernibly in there a lot, which tells me that all of the choices you have to make as an author, as the writer of this piece, needs to be intentional. So when you see the word discernibly, you mean, okay, so you understand that, okay, the teacher wants me to be making really intentional choices in my writing in order to get a good mark. Something that helped me a lot when I was writing, and it honestly continues to help me a lot when I'm writing because I still have to do a lot of writing at uni, is to write out the most important instructions in my own words. It's sort of like a little to-do list or a little checklist, or even just in sentence form. And I put them up the top of my Word document. So everything that I'm writing, I can go back and I can refer exactly, what is my task? Is this writing achieving the task that I have been given? And you leave it there right until your final edit where you get rid of it. So then you can hand it in. Now, be sure to get rid of it before you hand it in, or otherwise you'll have a strange little piece of writing at the top of your assignment. It is so helpful in the editing process as you're reading through, just checking again, is this writing achieving this task? Is this writing achieving this task? The number one thing to say as well in this is that if things are unclear, ask the question. There's absolutely no shame in saying to your teacher, I don't really understand this task, even if you've done it before. I don't really understand this task, or I don't really understand what this section of the task is asking me to do, or this particular criteria is asking me to do. Your teachers, they're there to help you. They will appreciate you being proactive and coming to them with your questions and your concerns. So definitely ask them about it. And you can also ask your peers about it as well. All right, my next key general tip is to go with the flow. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more later on in today's session, but it's super important that your writing flows and has a sort of logical build up throughout. This is particularly true in analytical writing. Teachers and markers put a lot of emphasis on this idea of building an argument consistently throughout a piece, as your thesis and points need to connect well with each other throughout your piece to sort of demonstrate that you're doing that well. So the easiest way to get into the habit of ensuring that your writing flows is having a really solid plan before you start writing. It just allows you to see all of your arguments out on the page. It allows you to see, am I putting my strongest arguments first? It allows you to see, am I actually using good analysis to build up my writing? If you're doing something like a narrative task, it allows you to see, am I actually building tension? Am I building tension up to a climax? Am I allowing there to be some sort of resolution? Having it all out in front of you will definitely ensure that you're not getting mixed up in, writing about things that aren't really linked to your key message in a narrative sense or your key argument in an analytical or persuasive sense. So that is really important. If you try and kind of hold all of that information in your head and just kind of like write off the cuff, then generally you'll start doing things like waffle or talk about things that aren't really connected to your thesis or your argument. And you typically get marked down for things like that. So make sure you have a really solid plan. Having a solid plan also helps with things like writer's block, because you can really easily just refer to what you have written down and go, okay, I need to know what I need to achieve next or what I need to write next. And that will generally keep things flowing nicely in terms of writing. Never, ever, ever skip planning. As someone who has been tutoring for quite a while and has definitely read and marked a lot of students' work, you can tell the difference between a student who has very clearly planned versus one who is just sort of writing off the cuff. So make sure you go ahead and plan for all of your writing work in English. My next tip is to give yourself time to improve. A lot of students feel as if maybe English is not quite as pressing as subjects that have exams, and so they generally leave assignment writing a little bit later. But the problem with that is that you don't actually have a lot of time to edit and rewrite your work. So it's a really good idea to give yourself time to draft and redraft again, because it will allow you to hand in the very best possible quality of work at the end. Rome wasn't built in a day. No high quality or award-winning novel or poem or play or speech was written in a single day. These authors gave themselves time to redraft and re-edit throughout. So what I basically mean by this is start your English assignments, your big pieces of writing, as soon as possible. Even if that's just getting a really solid plan down and then writing your introduction in the first sort of week or so you have the task. And it just gives you so much more time to have bad writing, and then in the last sort of crunch time you already have a whole lot of information that you can use as a foundation to build a really solid piece of writing on. It's a win-win situation, but it only happens if you get started early. So definitely go ahead, get started as early as possible. It also allows you to do things incrementally, which means that you don't have to be sitting down and writing like 1,000 words within 2 hours. You can just do sort of 100, 200, 250 words at a time. And it means that you're less likely to procrastinate as well, because it's a much smaller task that you have to be tackling each time. Okay, you should be talking to yourself, and I don't mean in a creepy way, not sort of sitting in a corner with your knees pulled up to your chest, muttering and rocking back and forth. I really just mean reflecting and also reading your work out loud. So let's talk about reading your work out loud first. When you get a piece of assessment back, and you're looking through and maybe you've dropped a sort of handful of marks and you're pretty disappointed because you feel like you worked really hard on it. Your arguments were really solid and strong. You felt like you were doing good synthesis, that there was a logical flow to your work and all of these sorts of things. And you realize that the marks that you dropped weren't for any of your ideas, but over things like grammar. You didn't have your commas in the right places, a few key words were misspelled, you didn't format your paragraphs properly, and things like that. There is truly almost nothing more frustrating when getting a piece of work back and finding that you've dropped marks over really small and kind of silly details. So it's really important to be editing your work very carefully before you hand it in. It ensures that you sort of avoid this problem. And one of the best ways to edit well to ensure that you catch those little mistakes is by reading your work out loud. When you read your work aloud, when you read anything aloud, your brain is basically processing the information in a different way. It's likely that you've read the work in your head a whole bunch of times, but reading it aloud allows you to pick up on mistakes. You realize that words are spelt wrong, you realize that there's commas missing, all of those sorts of things. So definitely make time in your editing process to be reading your work aloud. The other type of talking to yourself I'm referring to is reflecting. So I really truly understand the compulsion when you get a piece of work back to just throw it away and never think about it again, and that's certainly true in year 12 especially. But I encourage you to go back and sort of understand the mistakes that you might have made and how that might allow you to improve in the future. So if you're watching this video and you're in year 11 and you're heading into year 12, you might currently be doing a whole bunch of assignments that you'll do again in year 12. Instead of just putting those assignments aside and thinking, okay, I'll get back to those when we get to them in year 12, take the time to go through them carefully, understanding the mistakes you made, understanding what sections of the criteria you need to work on. It will allow you to be far more prepared when you get to doing those tasks in year 12, and you'll have a little bit of a checklist, a little bit of a to-do list, even a little bit of a battle plan about how you're going to address those mistakes and put forward even higher quality work in year 12. Now, if you're in year 12, I'm sure a few of you might be thinking, Maddie, I never, ever want to have to do this kind of writing ever again. But unfortunately, I'm not gonna lie, if you guys decide to go to university, then you're gonna have to be doing long form writing again. And there are so many things you can learn from your high school writing tasks that will help you in university. And even if you don't go to uni, a lot of different jobs will also require you to be doing some sort of writing task every now and then, whether it's reports or anything like that. So the more you can learn now in high school, the less you have to learn later when you would prefer to be thinking about other things. All right. Nice little typo there from me. Nourish you mind. Nourish your mind is the point I'm trying to make here. Now, a lot of students come to me and they ask me, Maddie, how can I get better at English? How can I get better at writing? It's just not something that comes naturally to me. And the key tips that I wanted to offer for you is to write as much as possible. Write as much as possible and read as much as possible. So one of the easiest ways that you can improve your writing is by reading. If you can get in 15 minutes or more or less of good reading every day, you will really begin to tell the difference between good and bad writing. You'll be able to see what sort of tips and techniques that the professional authors use in order to build their story, to make a point, to get good characterization, to convince readers of something. Not only that, but also your grammar and your vocabulary will improve. That's one of the easiest ways to get a better vocab is by just reading more. And it won't be so hard to tackle big writing tasks because you already have an idea of how to entertain and engage in all of those sorts of things. If you want to really stretch yourself, then I encourage you to read lots of different types of writing, novels, nonfiction, poetry, and different genres as well. And within that, you might discover a bit of a new passion. Now, in the past, I've just told people to do this and then sort of set them free to do it. But I have a few quick reading recommendations because often I am asked for this. If you are a fantasy buff, then the book I would recommend is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is amazing. It is set in a fictional sort of fantasy Oxford University, and it is about translation and magic, and it is really, really excellent. R.F. Kuang is amazing. So for fantasy sort of stuff, this is sort of historical fantasy, Babel. If you are interested in getting into a little bit of non-fiction, then I can't recommend memoirs enough. Michelle Zorner, who is the lead singer of a band called Japanese Breakfast, wrote an incredible memoir called Crying in H Mart, and I definitely recommend this one. If you prefer more of a mystery, thriller, crime sort of style, then The Dry by Jane Harper. This is an Australian novel set in a country town called Kiwara, and it was recently made into a movie, and then a sequel movie came out recently as well. So this is pretty incredible. I really enjoyed this one, and clearly it was well received. It won a whole bunch of awards. And then if you're interested in reading some classics, or you really enjoy classics, then I cannot recommend To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee enough. This is an amazing book. It kind of changed my life when I read it. It will just give you such a new, interesting, nuanced understanding about history and civil rights in the US. So definitely read this, and if you've read it before and it's been a while, reread it. So those are my 4 recommendations for today. Make sure you ask for recommendations, or even put some of your favorite books in the live Q&A chat below, and encourage others to be reading, because it's so good for your brain and it will definitely help with your writing skills as well. All right, a few little tips about English just to wrap up our advice section at the start. You don't need to enjoy English to be good at it, but it really helps. If you're going into the English classroom every week thinking, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this stuff, none of it's interesting, then you're not actually going to be engaging in the material in a sort of deep way, and it's more likely that you won't do as well in it. So I encourage you to have some fun with it. Don't take it too seriously. Have opinions on all of the characters and concepts that you're talking about. Have lots of discussions in class. Have friends around you to talk about English. I promise, if you decide that you're going to enjoy it, you will be better at it. And that goes for all of your subjects. Use the resources around you. Your peers and friends in your class can be such useful, helpful resources. The magic of humankind is that everyone is unique and different. Everyone comes from different cultural backgrounds. Everyone has different identities, ethnicities, all of these things. And it means that everyone has different perspectives on the exact same thing. So everyone has a different take on characters, or a different take on books and plays and movies and things. So have conversations with each other, ask each other questions, ask each other why. Why do you think this? Why do you think that? It's important to make your own success. So this is really linked to the last tip as well. Being proactive, particularly in year 12, is so important. Your teachers are there to help you. So if you have issues, if you have concerns, go to them with those questions and concerns. If you feel like your classroom teacher is not someone that you feel very comfortable approaching, then feel as if you can go to the other teachers in your English department as well, and be able to ask them questions. They will appreciate you going to them with them.